So you arrive in Tokyo, you're like, you have all this pressure about, your visa expiring.
Right.
No experience in software development, actually.
No.
Right. So that's
Yep.
also, and no job boards like Japan Dev or Tokyo Dev out there. So how did you tackle the problem? Like, how did you approach it?
That's a good point. So it wasn't really like it is now with,
Yeah.
the various job boards. So luckily I was able to use some Japanese tools. So Wantedly already existed.
Okay.
I don't know if you've worked with Wantedly at all. It's a Japanese, kind of social media hiring tool. And that was like relatively new actually at the time, but I used that to get in contact with some startups. I believe that's how I actually got my first job. But it was all like Japanese messages back and forth and stuff like that. Thankfully I was able to kind of do that to a level where, I would get a response and whatnot. But I do think that, that was to this day probably the most difficult period of my life, because I knew I had this 3-month, period, and I got like this room in a share house. Basically, it wasn't even a room; it was like a 3-person room, me and 2 other guys in this one tiny space, and it was like I don't know 50,000 yen a month.
Yeah.
So like the cheapest room I could find in Tokyo, basically, and I, so it was really a lot of just building side projects and stuff like that, getting some code up on my GitHub, since I was trying to prove that I could do some coding, even though I hadn't actually got that experience, right? So yeah, it was just a lot of late nights in McDonald's. I was drinking, 100 yen coffees just until like, the middle of the night, building these like Ruby on Rails applications to try and show to companies, and of course just sending, messages to every company I could possibly think of. Most of my clients now, the companies that I work with, I applied to back then, 10 years ago, the ones that existed already, right? And none of them, I think, even responded. Not that that's not anything against them, because I wouldn't have either. I had no experience, no visa, no money, like no real prospects. You know what I mean? So it's kind of amazing that I was able to get a chance at all, given how I didn't really have any of that stuff that you need to really get a job. But yeah, so I'm really grateful that I was able to get that opportunity anyway, and that they kind of took a chance on me.
If you could give like a step-by-step plan to someone in that exact situation right now, if time passed by, how would you tackle the problem?
Yeah, you mean if you're already here in Japan?
Yeah, someone in your same situation, because I'm on the other side where I meet a lot of people in that situation. They just did a boot camp and they quit their like teaching job, and they're in that situation. How would you approach it? Like, would you be able to kind of like give like a 4 or 5 step plan actually to people?
Yeah, definitely. So usually you're going to be on the tourist visa if your previous visa or whatever expires, or if you haven't got one yet. So you will have likely 3 months. And I think really the first thing you need to do is just networking. The more people in the tech industry here that you can meet and just talk to, the better. Some percentage of those will lead to you, actually being able to apply to companies and having a little bit more of a foot in the door. Just meetups. There's something going on like pretty much every night in Tokyo.
Yeah.
So just get out there, actually talk to people, find out who's hiring, because there are always going to be certain companies that are like in kind of a growth stage right now, and they just need lots of people. And that changes. So the best way to find out who that is at any given time is to go and actually talk to people. And then, just apply. I think Japan Dev is the site that I built to help people do that. So hopefully that's one of your destinations. There are a few others as well. You could use the Japanese sites as well. If you do speak, like the more Japanese you have, the better. So I would recommend stuff like Wantedly as well. I'm not a huge fan of like the super general job boards with like massive amounts of jobs, because I feel like it can be a bit of a, I guess it could be a bit of a pitfall for people where you can sometimes end up at a company that is not that great for foreigners, especially if you don't speak Japanese. It can lead to kind of a negative experience. So I do recommend that people try to be like pretty selective despite that, and don't take kind of like a lowball offer at like a kind of questionable company that doesn't really know how to work with foreigners just to stay in Japan, just to get the visa.
Yeah.
I feel like I see people do it, and it usually does not work out, unfortunately. And then just apply to as many jobs as you can, but put effort into each application. Don't just spray and pray, please.
Yeah.
People say it's a numbers game. That's technically true.
Yeah.
In the number of applicants that applications that you send, but you still have to put the effort into each one. Otherwise, there's no point. Really, just put in the efforts. I would tailor your resume and everything to each job specifically, so that they kind of see the keywords as quickly as possible when they're looking at those. I guess those are really the main things. And I think if you do that, usually you can find something. Of course, if you're a developer, then having a GitHub, having some proof that you can actually do the job, and you can show to companies and say, hey, look, you are a Ruby company. Here's some Ruby that I wrote on GitHub.
Yeah.
You can check it out. It's exactly the kind of thing that your engineers are doing day to day. Like, can we talk more? That's going to be a lot higher of a chance of getting a response than just a basic email that's like, hey, I hear you're hiring. Can I apply, please? So the more kind of artifacts you can create to kind of show that you are worth taking a chance on, the better.
Several really important things that you mentioned, like for example, putting a standard, right? Like you say, because I think when people are in that situation, they're okay to suffer, but it doesn't mean you're willing to suffer and being in a bad environment for like the next coming 2-3 years, so to speak. So
it's tempting.
Yeah.
And I had some offers like that from like just kind of questionable like gaming companies or whatever, and they'd be like, oh yeah, we'll pay you 2.6 million yen a year or whatever, right? Which is like,
didn't even know it was legal.
Exactly. That's technically livable, I think, if you're very frugal. But it's like, usually those companies, they're going to be using kind of outdated tech, which means that the skills you learn there probably aren't going to transfer to other companies very well. So there's a tendency to get stuck there. Usually there's going to be, all the kind of Japanese black company issues that you see, like long hours, overtime, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes there's power harassment and things like that. Basically, the negative side of the Japanese like work kind of style are all things that you're going to run into, or at least there's a much higher chance that you will. So I was, I decided I was going to hold out basically, and I didn't take any of those offers. And at like kind of the last second, actually, before I was going to have to go home, I found one company. It doesn't exist anymore. It was kind of bought out, but this like fashion app company actually that was willing to hire me. So it worked out for me. And I think, especially now, because that was 10 years ago, and things have grown so much. So I think it's a lot easier now. So if you really, even if you're just here for 3 months, if you put in the time and use that, use the time effectively, I think you can find something.
Yeah, like you mentioned, the job boards are there. I mean, LinkedIn is huge as well. Like, I personally, my whole career is built on LinkedIn.
That's the other one, actually. LinkedIn is huge too.
LinkedIn
absolutely
is huge.
Use LinkedIn.
Yeah, and like back to what you're saying as well, like getting paid 2.6, even if the job is great, I mean, you feel so undervalued because you will be networking, you will meet people that make twice more than you do.
Yes.
They do the same job, and it's, I think, mentally really draining as well for people, right?
Exactly.
Your willingness to learn and like.
And sometimes people will say like, oh, that's okay, even if the job is not ideal, it's not using the technologies I want to like work on. I'll work on like side projects and stuff outside of work and then get the next job based on that, and then they never do.
Yeah.